You know, the funny part is this. I've been here for a little over a year now, and I got used to preaching with everybody in there. And when I got used to it, I came up here. I was nervous seeing everybody in the pews, and oh my goodness, there's so many people listening to me. It's just not my classmates who I don't really care what they think in some ways. And then y'all leave, and I got nervous because there was nobody out there. I had to preach to stuffed animals out there, as y'all noticed. The tiger was the hardest critic. And so, beat some of you. No. Some of you are like, yeah, not me. And then all of a sudden, y'all come back, and now I'm like, oh, this is odd, seeing people again. So, next Sunday, if y'all want to play a good trick on me, go watch it on your screens, and I'll go, oh my gosh, I don't know how to handle it. Y'all are playing games on me. So I'm just sitting here thinking, I was like, oh goodness gracious, this is odd the opposite way. These are people nervous people. I'm going to preach mostly, or I'm going to talk mostly about the Acts, more so than the John. We know about Christ, and he says, ask and you shall receive. As John's commentary says, I'm going to kind of give you a little underline on what I'm going to talk about. This might be a thought bubble day for some of you, and so I'm going to tell you my underlying issue is Jesus, if you ask, the Spirit comes into your life. If you ask Christ, the Spirit will be with you, and the Spirit will help you and guide you. And it's the main source of our power, of our motivation, being filled with the Spirit. Sometimes we forget about that, and we try to do it ourselves, and we let these dusty rooms clutter up, and the Spirit's not really inside of us sometimes, and we get lost, and we don't know what to do. And so at that moment in time, Christ says, cry out to me for help, and I will fill those rooms, your heart, your spirit, with my Spirit, and you will be encouraged on. So, in light of that, I've got a nice story to tell, and I got told one day when I was giving one of the online sermons, for those of you who were watching it, I got told, Davis was sitting in the crowd, and I told a bunch of Davis stories, and they shall remain nameless, said, maybe Davis, he seems to kind of does he like being talked about in some way? And so I laughed, and I said, Davis tells me when I didn't talk about him. Daddy, you didn't tell a story about me. I said, okay, son. Well, I didn't have a good one today. There's always next week. And so I'm going to tell a little story about myself. And so when I was about Davis's age, about 8 or so, maybe younger, maybe older, I think I was around that 8, as you go in, as parents, you got to take your sons in for the shots, the yearly or the every year or every other year, something like that, shots. And so it was that time again. The year that I dread, whatever year that was, I don't remember, but I remember the needle. And I've never been a fan of needles, one at all, and I still not. Matter of fact, I had a nurse one day walking around trying to draw blood for me, and she kept waving the needle in front of me, and I said, you like carrying people out of your office because I'm going to pass out if you keep carrying that needle in front of me. And so, as a child, I was sitting in the doctor's room, and I remember it was me and my brother and my mom there, and my friends were there, all of us and the classmates. And so one of my friends, they went in and got her shot, walked out, and was kind of the tears as normal. And so that doesn't inspire confidence in me at all, because my mom said, oh, it doesn't hurt, don't worry about it. And I said, oh, that I don't trust you. And so it was our turn, and so we went back to the doctor's office, and went and sat down and waited for the ominous moment of the prick, and my brother got his shot, and he was fine, cried, lollipop, made it all better for him. And then I sat there, and the doctor got ready and pulled the needle out, and as the doctor was walking towards me with the needle, I decided that this was my moment. This was my stand. This is where I'm going to draw the line. And so I hopped off of the bed that they had you on, and I made a beeline out that door and into the parking lot. And this was the days when you didn't have to worry about anything. And so I jumped in the car because it wasn't locked, and I locked the doors. And my mom came out, and as she unlocked the door, I did and then hit the next slide, and I was being about as mobile as my son is at this age, and I could squirm faster. She could unlock doors. So we stayed like that at a standoff for about a good 15 minutes. I'm not coming out. This is a true story. No embellishment whatsoever. Everybody knows the best sermon stories are the ones that are true, not embellished so much. And so I did that. And she finally got tired of me playing this game, and so she went back into the doctor's office. And I thought, man, this is good. I'm winning. Until she came back out and said those words. Your father's on his way. Now, anybody knows, and my son does know, if I receive a phone call to come to the school and I get pulled out of work, that it's not a good thing. And so my dad arrived at the doctor's office. And I saw him through the window, still in the car, debating if I had a better chance of living in the car or out of the car. And I knew it got real in that moment. And I decided that business was what was going to happen at that time. Needless to say, I got my shot. I think my parents invested in a straitjacket afterwards. Chains to tie me up every time we went into the doctor's office. But in that very moment was an awakening. In that very moment, it got real. Right? Your dad's standing out there. You've pushed too far. But regardless, it got real in that moment. The mission was clear. My mom called for help, and she got it. Pentecost. I talked with the choir, and I asked them this question. Do we know what Pentecost, the word itself, means? It's a Greek word. Does anybody know what Pentecost means? This is not a rhetorical question. No. It means 50. It's a Greek word that means 50th. And it's only mentioned a couple times. The word Pentecost is actually only mentioned a couple times in the Bible, mostly in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, which is what the Jews who had been pushed out of Israel, or out of Israel, they translated in their language. They had grown up and not known the Jewish language, so they knew Greek. And so they translated. So you had the Septuagint, which is a Bible. A lot of our Bibles or parts of the Septuagint are actually used to translate some of our translations. But it means 50th. Again, it's a Greek translation. And what it is 50 days after Easter, we celebrate Pentecost. If you go back, this is the 50th day, something around that. And that's why Pentecost and Easter kind of shift around, because Easter shifts, and with Easter shifts 50 days is Pentecost. And so on that, if we read Acts, it says on the day of Pentecost. Well, Pentecost has, like all of ours, Jewish roots in it. And it happens to fall around the 50th day after Passover, which is what they call the Festival of Feasts, which is 50 days after Passover. And so, as we read the gospel accounts, we know around Passover is the crucifixion of Christ. And so, 50 days after that, we get the Holy Spirit being given on the Festival of Weeks. When the Jewish tradition, to kind of connect this, the Festival of Weeks is a time in which the Jewish society would bring the first fruits, their wheat. It's an agrarian type holiday. They would bring it to the temple for a blessing, to give praise to God, and to also ask for a blessing that the harvests, the remainder of the harvest, will come in without any problems 50 days later. And so they celebrate this around this time. Well, it was such a big holiday in that time because it's after Passover. You got the 50 days after, you got the Festival of Weeks, and you're bringing the agrarian society, or the agrarian part of it, in. But after the destruction of the temple and the diaspora, everybody going out, it focused more on the giving of the law. You see, the Passover is when? When the Jews left Egypt. And then 50 days later is when they arrived at the base of Mount Sinai, we're told. It says months inside inside of Exodus. We know that their Jewish calendar followed the lunar cycle. We follow a solar calendar. So there's some differences in it. But 50 days later, they arrive at the base of Mount Sinai. And at the base of Mount Sinai, Moses receives the law to give to the people. So after the destruction of the temple, when they couldn't focus on giving their first fruits, their harvest, they focused on the giving of the law, the blessing that they received by God of being their people, and asking that that God will continue this blessing upon them. You see, after that 50 days of wandering in the wilderness, see, Moses said, "Follow me." They'd seen the wondrous God and all of his acts free them from the Egyptian and wandered them around, not really kind of knowing what's going on. They just know, follow Moses because God said so. Confused, scared, maybe hungry. Starting after 50 days, you can start seeing kind of the grumbling start going on. Where are we going? What are we doing? It's kind of like going on a road trip with your kids. Are we there yet? Where are we going? I need to use the bathroom. See, Moses, we read the chapters before. This is 19 and 20 in Exodus. The chapters before, Moses camps out, meets with his father Jethro, and he starts talking about how to deal with the grumblings of the Israelites, the Jewish community. And Jethro gives them advice. Don't handle it all yourself. Let other people help you out. But then they arrive after that at Mount Sinai, hungry and confused, angry, not knowing what to do. But God tells Moses to come up to the mountain to receive the law. So he shows up, God shows up to his people in a cloud of smoke and lightning and all this wonder and gives his people the law. See, the remainder of chapters 19 and 20 talk about how the priests should wear their garbs, how the people should act. Here's the laws. This is how you will be a nation for God. This is how you will be my people. Here is your help and your guidance. You have asked, and now you shall receive a way to live, a way God expects them to be and to act amongst each other. And in being this nation for God, how they will show God's righteousness across the lands. See, there's a historical context there. See, as God sets up his people, he also sets up an example to the world of what it's like to be God's people. If you follow in God's footsteps, if you follow in God's words, if you listen, then you will be blessed and you will show the world God's grand blessing. See, through the law, God provides for his people. He gives them guidance, expectation, and a mission. And it becomes real to them in that moment. It becomes no longer a promise, but it becomes real for them. See, in those chapters is how to set up the tabernacle, how to build the altar table, how to give sacrifices, how to build the ark. All this comes down to his people, and it becomes real. They are his people. You see, 50 days after the crucifixion of Christ, the Spirit comes upon the disciples. And he sends them out to do his mission. See, it gets real in that moment. They're no longer disciples following Christ around. They're no longer scared individuals who ran off after the crucifixion. And Jesus comes back and talks to them and says, do not worry. He tells them, go back into Jerusalem and wait. And they do. And then the Spirit descends upon them. And like a rushing wind, like flames above their heads, he empowers them. Empowers them to go out and preach the gospel, the truth about God and God's love. Things get real in that moment. They no longer become the disciples following Jesus. They become the bearers, the apostles, the bearer of God's gospel, of God's good news, of the truth. See, it all transitions for them now. They're given the ability to speak in the different languages because Greeks are coming, or Jews are coming from all across the Roman Empire who maybe have spoken the language of the areas they lived in, saying, this is the truth, this is the news. Jesus was crucified, but Jesus was raised, and he is glorified, and God is glorified through the resurrection of Jesus. And here's what he taught us in 50 days after the crucifixion. See, they were upstairs and seeking maybe some direction, replacing Judas because he had gone and left the group. Wondering what to do, Peter stands up, says, we kind of got to do this. But 50 days later, a wind rushes through. A mission is given. Help is provided through the Spirit. And we get Pentecost, the birth of the church and how we celebrate it, with the true spreading of the good news into all the lands. From that moment, again, it got real. They weren't upstairs. They weren't running scared. They weren't trying to figure out how they should take care of their small group. They now got real and into the world, spreading the gospel. Got years, generations of separation. You see, for the disciples, there was a rush of wind and the flames above their heads. For the Israelites in the wilderness, there was smoke and lightning. For the disciples were chosen by Jesus, handpicked, called by name, to proclaim God's love and redemption to all the world. The Israelites were handpicked by God from enslavement to freedom as the seeds of Abraham, to be an example unto the world of God's blessings. They were given the law and a way of life. And the disciples proclaimed the law of love and grace. God's people, generations apart. The Israelites received their help and their mission through the law, and the disciples received it through the Spirit. You see, today, what does that mean for us today? When we give ourselves over to God, when we lay ourselves at the feet of Christ, sometimes we wonder, where do we go from there? See, we're always led to this moment of giving ourselves to Christ, but maybe we don't know quite what that means for us. Taking these new steps into a new life, heading towards the new kingdom, it's kind of confusing. Maybe we're a little blind at times. We don't know quite where it goes. We're nervous. We're scared. We don't know the rules, maybe, as we enter a new church. But in the right moment, God may be calling us to the right moment in time, at the right place. So we walk faithfully along the path. The Israelites followed faithfully behind Moses to the base where they received the law. The disciples followed Jesus faithfully, not always knowing what he might be saying, but they followed faithfully and received his blessing, and in that received his Spirit. And so we ask through the Spirit to do the same. We walk faithfully. Because there might be a time in which we're called. There might be a time in which our life becomes more more full, and we bring that fullness of the Spirit to someone else. See, the Israelites blessed the world in showing them that they were a separate people blessed by God. The disciples were the apostles who brought us the church, or what we call the church. And see, we may be brought, we may be brought in front of someone who needs God in that moment, for you to proclaim the truth to them. You see, that we have a broken world we live in. And our path may bring us in front of some of this brokenness. It may bring us in front of a child who's feeling unloved. It may show us their faith and say, show this child some love. It's a life of rejection. They have lived that far. I know when this last couple months here with my son, I got so busy with work, sometimes I just look at his face and he just wanted to know, am I as important as this? So I had to say yes. Son, let's sit at the table. Let's eat peanut butter and jelly together, and let's share in stories of dinosaurs and dragons. Because, son, you are that important. We may be brought in front of that same face, pleading, agonizing in rejection, saying, am I that important am I that important in the world as you are? For those who have long marriages, or for those, maybe it's in a spouse who's just longing to know that they're still needed, still wanted in the relationship. Am I still someone that you desire to be with, to grow old with? May be in the face of the persecuted, and they feel that's so left out of society, chased and hounded, feeling unloved, but nowhere else to go. To your path may lead you in front of this moment. Maybe in front of the church that's maybe lost, needing some direction in a time in which it's confusing. How do we walk forward? How do we go forward with new? That our path may lead us to that. And at that moment in time, brothers and sisters, it becomes real for us. It becomes real. We're no longer reading the scriptures and singing the hymns and memorizing the verses, but we are sharing in that moment the grace and love of God. We are sharing that moment in time, and we're saying, this is the mission of the church. We're saying in that moment in time that you are loved, and that because you were born in this world, Christ loves you. That is when it becomes real for us. That is when the Spirit enters into you, and you share with that person, that moment in time, that society, that church, that group of people, that spouse, that friend, and say, this is real. God's love is real. His grace is real for all. God handing down the laws to his people, say, this is real. I'm not leading you on a goose chase. I'm not playing with you. Here's my law. Jesus talking to his disciples say, this is the truth. Not a new truth, but the truth that has always existed in the world. This is the truth about God. And he loves, and he has grace and mercy for all. And it gets real. And we receive that help through the Spirit. So, as you're going through life, I ask, where is your path leading you? Are there moments in time in which you feel lost and you don't know what's going on in the world? Are there moments in time in which it becomes, maybe you're slow in your growth of your faith? You think, I don't know where to go from here. Maybe it's the Spirit leading you to to share in that, for it to become real, not just for you, but for the world and for the person that you run into. Share it.